Hello and welcome back to the channel. This video is all about Ronald Speirs, the hard as nails platoon leader during World War II, a leader to be respected. But Ronald Speirs had a dark secret. Now, if you haven't watched my previous videos on Aldbourne and the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment in England, then I highly recommend that you do. This small part of England became home to so many men from the 101st Airborne Division, and there are still lots of locations that can be seen today. This porchway, for example, has its lodgers standing outside in 1944. It still exists today. The village was where they honed their skills and prepared for the greatest battle of their lives, the invasion of Normandy. And they did this living side by side with the locals. This picture of Robert Burr Smith clearly demonstrates the proximity of Aldbourne's American visitors to the everyday population. It looks as though he's almost standing in the cabbage patch of the houses behind him, but in reality he's actually in the barrack blocks accommodation building on Farm Lane. And these are those barrack blocks, smiling, youthful soldiers living side by side with the locals. Their purpose was clear: preparations for the invasion of Fortress Europe. Only this time was made difficult by personalities such as Captain Herbert Sobel and his tyrannical leadership style. For many, though, the downtime provided an opportunity to mingle with the locals. Sadly, for some, they would never return home to cultivate these early green shoots of romance. But there are those American soldiers who did return home from the war, and they married their English sweethearts. In Ronald Speirs' case, he married a 24-year-old woman called Margaret Edwina Griffiths. Not local to Aldbourne, but they did marry in the church here. In this picture you can see Speirs crouched on the left with Buck Compton standing on the far right. They married on the 20th of May 1944, barely weeks before he would jump behind enemy lines on the 6th of June. They also had a son in 1945 called Robert, so perhaps you can do the maths. This Norman church is very old, with sections dating back to the 13th century. You might be able to imagine rows of US Airborne soldiers lining these pews as they wait for the marriage party to arrive. Ronald Speirs stood by the altar, waiting for that first glimpse of his bride. As an example of the age of the church, you can see a grave here from the 1400s. The inscription reads, "Here lies Richard Goddard, once of Upham, and Elizabeth his wife, and which Elizabeth died on the 14th day of July, Anno Domini, 1495. On whose souls God have mercy, Amen." So, as I alluded to, there is a scandal associated with the Speirs-Griffiths wedding. There's a story that she was already married, and that her husband had died in the war. Now, this is partly true. Margaret was actually betrothed to a Robert Norman Gutteridge, who had joined the British Army and gone to war in Libya in 1941. He was a Royal Artillery officer who was serving in the 31st Field Regiment Royal Artillery, which was then part of the 4th Indian Division, 8th Army. Robert served with distinction before being severely wounded, and he eventually became a prisoner of war. He was even awarded the Military Cross, second only to the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military decoration. His citation is as follows: Unit, 31st Field Regiment Royal Artillery, 4th Indian Division, 13 Corps, 2nd Lieutenant Robert Norman Gutteridge. On the 3rd of December 1941 at Sidi Aziz, 2nd Lieutenant Gutteridge took charge of his troop after his troop commander and second in command had become casualties. He showed coolness and determination when controlling the troop, which was subjected to heavy machine gun and shell fire. Again, on the 14th of December 1941 at point 204, when Gutteridge was acting as the gun position officer, his troop was attacked by tanks, but he directed the fire with such skill that the attack was beaten off. On the following day, the troop was attacked again by infantry and tanks supported by artillery. Gutteridge was a splendid example to his men, walking coolly from gun to gun, cheering up the detachments and directing their fire until he fell seriously wounded. After he was taken prisoner, Robert was transferred to a military hospital in Italy before being moved to Oflag 79 in Braunschweig, Germany. He was then liberated by the Americans in April of 1944. So what happened next is a little less clear. Robert Gutteridge did return to England and he did find Margaret, only now she was married to a US officer. We do know that Margaret and Robert did get back together before the end of the war and that they did marry, only it was in 1947, and allegedly they remarried with Speirs' consent. But I know the question you really want answered. When Ronald Speirs was collecting all of that silverware, which you would have seen in the series Band of Brothers, he was sending that back to Margaret. Did he get that silverware back when they separated? Well, the answer actually is no. He allowed her to keep all of the silverware, all of his booty from the war, and he returned home to the United States. Okay, well, I really hope you enjoyed that video and hopefully you've learnt something new about one of your favourite characters from the Band of Brothers. To give you something to look forward to in the next couple of months, I'm going to be travelling to the United States to spend some time with our allies, and I'm also going to be travelling to Normandy to do some filming over there as well. So if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please make sure you do, because I would hate for you to miss out. Until next time.